The Carolina Hurricanes are entering this coming season without an AHL affiliate. In this episode, we will discuss the impact this will have on the Hurricanes this season and how long it will take for there to be a replacement for the Hurricanes. All in this episode of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, Caniacs. I'm your host, Jared Ellis, and you're listening to Locked On Hurricanes on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Hurricanes your first listen of this Thursday afternoon. Forgot what day it was there for a second. And I am joined once again by Locked On OG, one of the first friends I ever made at Locked On, Sarah Avampato. How are you doing this afternoon, Sarah?
Doing good. Always glad to be back where it all started.
Yes. And you got to see my sticker haul too.
So good.
Before we started recording. But that's not what you're here to talk about. We could spend all day talking about my dumb cursed stickers that I bought. But I think that a lot of people have been asking as of late is what's going on with the Hurricanes AHL situation. The Chicago Wolves obviously wanted to be independent going into this coming season for them, and that leaves the Hurricanes without an AHL affiliate this year. And obviously they had a bunch of guys on that Wolves roster that were there playing and continuing to develop their game. And now they don't have that. Mm-hmm. So I guess the big question on everyone's mind is, well, first off, why? And then two, what is the immediate impact of this going to be on the season? Like, how are they going to handle this? Where are their guys going to play? Are they going to play at all that stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the biggest question of why is capitalism, baby. I think that at the end of the day, the Hurricanes have their goal of what they want from their AHL team. The Wolves have their goal, and the Wolves in their mind, in their ownership's mind, is basically, we want to put a team on the ice of people who are going to be there and who are going to be able to win games. And we're not going to have to deal with the like, oh, surprise, your roster isn't what you thought it was going to be, right? Because they're all somewhere else. And, from the Wolves' perspective, I think it's just sort of a business decision of, you know what, we've spent a lot of time doing work for other people, and now we just want to, do our own thing. There was a really great, if you're not already following him, Patrick Williams is kind of one of the go-to guys for AHL news. And he had a really great tweet thread today kind of talking about the Wolves situation and breaking it down. And, one of the points that he makes is, there's a business to run at this level. Yeah. And the Wolves, are used to having big crowds and having people want to come to games. And when your team isn't doing well, because your team is made up largely of developmental guys, and you don't have a whole lot of elite talent or veteran talent on your roster, like it's harder to sell tickets. Like last season was rough for them in terms of just from the eye test of being at games, in terms of attendance and butts in seats. And so I'm guessing that they're also thinking that, if they can construct their own team how they want to construct it, then, the success lies with them, but then also the failure lies with them if it doesn't go well. But, I think that they're thinking about, we want a team that is reliable in that we know who's going to be there from day to day. And you're not necessarily going to have that whenever you're more beholden to an NHL team. So who knows how it's going to work in practice. They've got some interesting names lined up as guys who have signed contracts with them. So there is, there was a lot of concern about like who's even going to play for this team, but there are a lot of guys who, they have almost a full roster, I believe, of people who can play and who were willing to sign AHL deals to do that. So it's going to be interesting. As to what happens to the players who, have been there, that's still a really big question mark for a lot of them. I know a bunch of the European players have already been loaned back to European clubs. Tuukka Tiexala is one of those. Ville Koivunen, Alexi Salmi, so many letters in those Finnish names. All three of those guys have been loaned back to Finnish clubs. Tiexala spent probably the most time playing over in North America. But so they're going to play in Europe this year. I believe Alexei Pashin has also been loaned to a KHL team. So I think for the European players, you're going to see them just go back to Europe, which is great for them in terms of playing time, but also kind of means that they're not. You're essentially going to write them off from making an appearance in the NHL this year.
Mm-hmm.
European clubs aren't usually excited to be like, yeah, we'll take this guy for a couple weeks. It's, you're usually making a commitment to say we're going to loan this guy the whole year. So, when you see a European player get assigned or loaned to, somewhere in Finland or the Sweden or Russia, you can just assume they're going to be there until that European season is ended. The rest of the guys, who knows? I think some of them, like, Jack Drury, who kind of went back and forth, I would expect him to be a regular. Even if he's not in every game, he maybe gets rotated in and out, but I would expect him to stay there. Someone like Jamison Reese, I think, could have a good shot at sticking in the NHL. But, for those other guys who are maybe not quite ready to make that jump, or, someone like Griffin Mendel, who had been playing on an AHL contract for the past couple years, finally got his NHL deal, which is good for him. I think it recognizes the hard work and the growth that he's had, but I doubt that he's going to be in the NHL, And so I think what you're going to see is some of these guys are going to get loaned out to other AHL teams, which isn't like super common, but I feel like you'll see it a lot of times after the trade deadline, wherever some minor league guy gets thrown in a deal, and then they're like, oh, we've loaned him back to where he came from. Kind of as a, we're going to do this guy a solid and just let him stay, not make him move his family for 2 months or something. And you'll see that in the AHL of players will still be under contract to the Hurricanes, but maybe, Ryan Suzuki winds up playing for the Providence Bruins or something. It doesn't mean that he's part of, the Bruins system or the whoever system where he ends up. It just means that we needed a home for this guy. And you can still call him up and reassign him just like you could any other player in the AHL. It just means that they're going to have to form a lot more relationships with AHL general managers who would be willing to take on a guy who is not part of, the system, essentially, to let him play there. And I fully expect, I feel like I don't know if it's just been hinted at or like if it's actually a real thing, but it feels like the Hurricanes are just going to carry 3 goalies. So,
yeah,
there's your Kochakov solution, is just 3-headed monster.
Yeah, I've heard that same thing as well. And myself and Andrew, we had talked about it. But yeah, we definitely think that's what's going to happen with the goalie situation. But, you mentioned, them wanting to be, independent and, like you said, at the very start, coming from a business perspective. And I do have a couple questions on that as well. And we will dive into those questions right after this quick break, folks. Now, folks, here on Locked On Hurricanes, we love baseball. You see me wearing my Tiger shirt a lot. You'll see Andrew wearing his Kansas City Royals shirt a lot. I don't know what baseball shirt Sarah would wear, but if you are a baseball fan and you want to take a bet on the MLB, you can take your first swing at betting on the MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All that on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on the MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on, FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Now, I want to dive back into the business side of things that you were talking about before we move on. And one thing, when you're talking about with that of guys that are coming and going all the time, do you think that how things had gone over these past couple seasons with dealing with COVID, guys coming in and out
Mhm.
of the lineup? I remember that game against the Kings when you were here
Mhm.
in Raleigh, like
Mhm.
half of the
Yeah.
Hurricanes roster that night was
Mhm.
players from Chicago.
Mhm.
And given that is something that is out of the Hurricanes'
Mhm.
hands, out of the Wolves, out of everyone's hands at that
Mhm.
point. But do you think that is something that may have played a bit of a factor in that decision? Just it's something that's still kind of fresh on their
Yeah.
mind and just being like, we, we can't put a good product on the ice
Mhm.
if we're having guys,
Mhm.
go in and out the door all the time.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I imagine it was in the back of their minds of,
Mhm,
"Listen, we want a situation that we can control a little bit more and that we don't have, that much uncertainty over." If you're really only beholden to what's going on with your team instead of having to deal with, an NHL team being like, "4 of our guys have COVID. We need your 4 best players now."
mhm,
I think that has to be in the back of their mind, and I do think that the weirdness of the past whatever 3 some years I think maybe has, and this is just hypothetical. This isn't like any
yeah,
secret insider knowledge, but I think that just extrapolating from what we see in society in general, caused a lot of people to kind of take a step back and say, like, is this what I want? Is this how I want to
mhm,
proceed in my job or in whatever? And I would imagine that the Wolves ownership and leadership maybe has done the same thing of saying, like, all right, is this really how we want to go forward?
mhm,
Win the cup one year, the next year we have, 3 returning players and everything else has to start from scratch again.
mhm,
And it seems like their answer is let's try something new,
mhm,
which who knows? But yeah, I do think that probably at least weighs in people's minds of, these are problems that we had that are kind of directly related to the fact that we have this relationship with an NHL team. And maybe if we didn't have that relationship, we wouldn't have had these problems.
mhm. Yeah, because I remember in that time period when there was
Mhm.
so much back and forth that there always being, they're meant in, good fun and, just trying to be funny, but,
Mhm.
tweets, from folks, on Twitter, obviously, of talking about, how frustrated it must be for the Wolves to have
Mhm.
those guys going back and forth and the fact that it wasn't like it was with the Checkers where they had that really long standing
Mhm.
relationship prior,
Yeah.
where this was one like it was like right at the start
Yeah.
of their
Yeah.
agreement, and that's how you start off with
Mhm.
going back and forth so much. Yeah, that could have not
Yeah.
may not have been the best foot to start off on
Mhm.
that kind of affiliation that if they were still with the Checkers, you know,
Mhm.
any sort of again, speculative, frustration that the Wolves had, they may have been able to be like, all right, we're cool. But
Right.
again, that's all speculative. But yeah, like you said, I definitely feel like that had to weigh in the decision as well
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, and I think that from talking with, Brock Sheehan, the now former, I guess, head coach of the Wolves throughout the season, and you would talk to him about, like, I know this isn't the lineup that you thought you were going to have. Like, I know that,
Mhm,
this team looks different than what you probably thought it was going to look like whenever signed your contract to play here or to coach here. And, I mean, it's hockey, right? Like,
yeah.
everyone gives you the standard coach answers, and they're all very good for the most part at, like, not letting frustrations, boil up
Hmm.
whenever they're talking to media or whatever. But you can tell that, like, when you read between the lines when you're talking with him about, why didn't this series go the way that you thought it was going to go? Why is the team struggling on XYZ? And the answer that you got a lot of times kind of boiled down to, well, I can only do what I can with the pieces that I have.
Hmm.
And when the pieces that you have are, like, I feel like at one point last year they had, like, an ECHL guy as their first line center. Like, that's not, because everyone was hurt or up in Carolina or whatever. And that's not what they sat out and planned for.
Hmm.
That's not what they expected the team to look like. And so, I I think, moving to their own, giving this experiment a go of trying to be their own independently run team, I think will solve for a lot of that.
Mhm.
Does it defeat the purpose of the AHL being the,
Yeah.
NHL's development league? Yeah, but oh well.
Yeah, pretty much. And, you mentioned the ECHL, and that was, another thing that I thought about of, how does this affect that
Mhm.
pipeline?
Mhm.
Because, you had the Hurricanes, and you had the Wolves, and then you had the Norfolk
Mhm.
Admirals in
Mhm.
Norfolk, Virginia. How exactly does this affect that?
Mhm.
Because do they go with the Wolves, or do they stay with the Canes? And if,
Mhm.
I mean, they're not really gonna do a whole lot of
Yeah.
calling up from there, but because I remember when the Hurricanes changed stuff a few years ago. Their ECHL team, I forget who it was originally, but then it went to the Greenville Swamp Rabbits.
Mhm.
Oh, it was the Everblades. I have a
Mhm.
freaking jersey. But the Swamp Rabbits ended up going with the Checkers. Is that what's going to happen here, or how's that going to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I haven't really seen an answer to that yet in terms of what the Wolves are going to be doing in terms of an ECHL affiliate. You know, the Wolves have kind of generally just sort of pulled from whoever.
Hmm.
So occasionally they would send a Hurricanes contracted player down to Norfolk. I know, like what's his name, Blake Murray.
Hmm.
Um,
I remember
he
Jack LaFontaine went there as well.
Yeah, LaFontaine went there. I think it was Blake Murray had spent some time with them as well, and so that'll be an interesting question in terms of if the Hurricanes themselves have prospects who they can't find an AHL home for. You know, they're just going to have to find a random ECHL team to put them on.
Hmm.
For the Wolves, they've always just sort of pulled guys from wherever. They pull a lot of guys from the Indy Fuel, from Fort Wayne, any of the kind of local teams, and a
Hmm.
lot of the signings that they've made already are guys who there's who have either appeared in some way
Hmm.
previously. There's some guys who have played for Allen Americans in the ECHL. They signed a guy from Maine. And it's one of those things where those guys might end up going back there.
Hmm.
But I think that's a kind of time will tell sort of
Yeah.
situation. But yeah, I think that the Wolves will probably just be sending or taking people from whoever can give them a guy or needs a guy, you
Hmm.
know. And the Hurricanes will probably have to, similarly to how they are going to have to find a willing dance partner for the, 3, 4, 5 prospects they've got for the
Hmm.
AHL. They're going to have to find another one to shove some random other kid down. Although it becomes a little bit of a numbers game why they usually
Hmm.
end up having to send a guy to the ECHL. So, if you're trying to find 5 homes for 5 players, you might be able to find 5 different AHL teams instead
Yeah.
of having to stash one in the ECHL somewhere. So, in that regard, it may actually end up working out better.
Yeah, it's just gonna be one of those things. We just got to see how the summer plays
Hmm.
out.
Yeah.
But one thing again, we pretty much established they're gonna go into the season without an AHL affiliate. How long do you see them staying like this? You obviously know the Hurricanes are
Hmm.
trying to find someone,
Hmm.
but as far as available clubs for them to have that affiliation with,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
they're not gonna wanna, do a thing where they have to share with another team. I
Hmm.
remember, the Hurricanes and the Kraken, or the
Hmm.
Hurricanes and the Predators did that for one season.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it just feels like that's not the most ideal thing. How long do you see the Hurricanes not having one, and how long will it take
Yeah.
for them to get a new one?
Yeah, I mean, and I think some of that is I was trying to do some quick research and I couldn't find the answer to it. But, part of it's going to depend on what other teams have affiliations that are
Mhm,
ending sometime soon. And, so there's ones that have always been stable, like Milwaukee and Nashville has been a partner forever. A bunch of them are now owned, a bunch of AHL teams are now owned by the NHL teams. So those aren't
mhm,
going to change. Like, Rockford is owned by the Blackhawks now. So that's not going to change. That's their team.
mhm,
Henderson is owned by the Vegas Golden Knights. Um, So there's a very limited number of teams left at this point who aren't owned by their NHL affiliate. And there's an even smaller number who I think would be even in the conversation for changing. So Hershey isn't owned by the Washington Capitals, but that partnership has existed for 1 billion years and I think will continue to exist. Same with the Providence Bruins. They're not owned by the Bruins, but like that's not going to change.
The logos are basically the same.
Yeah, they're basically the same. And so there's a few other teams like that as well. I think Grand Rapids is another one that's not owned by the Red Wings, but like that's not going to change. So you have a very limited, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 teams really who could possibly end their affiliation. And then that's when the Hurricanes would kind of swoop in and say, hey, Springfield, are you tired of dealing with the Blues? Would you like to deal with us instead? But so I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch. And even if the Wolves blink and say, oh, actually this sucked, like we made a mistake, I don't think the Hurricanes are going to be like, oh, it's okay, like let's put it back. Like I don't think that's going to happen. So that it's really from a like AHL political landscape kind of perspective, it's going to be really interesting to watch this play out of how long do the Hurricanes kind of sit out there in this limbo of we don't have an affiliate, which team cracks first. Do the Wolves decide they want to go back to the way things were and lure some other team away from their current affiliate situation? Like there's all sorts of weird machinations that could happen. But yeah, I think that in some ways this is out of the Hurricanes' hands because they can't force another team to change what they're doing. So I think they have to wait until, if they don't want to do a split affiliation thing, I think they have to wait, which is going to suck.
Yeah. I definitely feel like split affiliation is definitely probably the strongest possibility as of right now. But again, there's a whole nother bunch of other scenarios that could happen with this. And we'll dive into some other possible scenarios for this right after this quick break. All right, folks, we are back. And now it's time to talk about possible scenarios for the Hurricanes getting a new AHL affiliate. And like I mentioned before the break, I do feel that a split affiliation could definitely be the most likely, at least to start out with. I mentioned earlier that the Hurricanes, they did have a split affiliation with, it was the Wolves. I think it was them, the Wolves, and Nashville or Seattle, one of the two. I don't remember. It was a couple years ago. But I feel like that is definitely probably the strongest possibility because, like you were saying, there's only like 5 or 6 teams without any affiliation. And, so you don't really know how that's going to shake out there. But how do you see that playing out? Do you see a split affiliation to start? Do you see them landing a solo thing or what do you see happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think for this coming year, I see them just kind of doing the like ad hoc. All right, we've sent this guy to Providence, we sent this guy to Charlotte, we sent this guy to Coachella Valley. Like you're just putting guys wherever you can put them, wherever there's room. Whatever team is like, oh yeah, I need a forward named Brian Suzuki. Like done. But that agreement's going to get old real fast. So I do think that while they're waiting for some other affiliation situation to pop up for some team to end their current affiliation and decide maybe they want to move on, I think that like the split affiliate is probably the only way to have like real stability. And yeah, it was the COVID year was when the Hurricanes and the Predators shared the affiliate because the Milwaukee Admirals opted out of playing. And so that's when they there were a handful of teams that opted out and they were allowed to kind of send their players to wherever else. So the Wolves took them on. They took on the Predator or the Admirals head coach as like a consultant. So he was still kind of around. But the Wolves have done the split affiliation thing previously as well. Whenever they were still, it was when they switched from the Blues to Vegas as their NHL affiliate. And so the first year they were affiliated with Vegas, they also still had a whole bunch of St. Louis prospects. because St. Louis was kind of in the position that the Hurricanes are in right now of, oops, we don't have an AHL team. And so they kept a bunch of their guys there in Chicago because they didn't really have anywhere else to put them. And Vegas didn't really have much of a prospect pool to fill out a team anyway, because they were brand new. And so that worked really well. So, I think that if I'm it worked well from a roster. We have enough players to play the game standpoint. I don't know that either the Blues or the Golden Knights were thrilled about that, but that's how it worked. So, if I were the Hurricanes, I would be kind of looking at what AHL teams don't have particularly robust prospect pools, who is going to have trouble filling out an AHL team with their guys, and maybe start picking up the phone and calling them to see, what can we work out in terms of a split affiliation, or, even if it's informal, just this is where I'm going to send most of my guys. Because there's always teams that have, kind of crummy prospect pools. They don't have a lot of guys who have come up, who are ready to play in the AHL yet. And so I think that could be interesting as an option of who is going to be struggling this year to fill out a team with NHL pipeline prospects, and can we put our guys there instead? Which is a potential solution that's going to require a bunch of phone calls.
Yeah, it's going to be a whole lot of phone calls, Zoom meetings, emails. I don't know if they use faxes anymore.
It's the NHL. They probably do.
I don't even know how to use a fax machine. I'm sure that makes you feel good.
I gotta go.
But one thing that I did think about was, I remember when Vegas started their affiliation with Henderson. They had bought the team in San Antonio, moved them to Henderson. Again, I don't know the business side of things, what teams could potentially be for sale or anything like that. But do you see this potentially leading to Tom Dundon and company deciding to buy up an AHL team? Because I vaguely remember there being that kind of conversation when the affiliation with the Checkers ended a few years ago. I remember that being a topic of conversation then. And do you see that as a possibility, especially with so many other teams owning AHL teams?
Yeah, I think that kind of comes down to the same issue of you're dealing with that limited pool of teams that aren't owned by their NHL parent team, because AEG isn't going to sell the Ontario Reign, right? That's not going to happen. So you're kind of dealing with that weird sort of off kilter group of Springfield, Providence, Hershey. I will say Springfield comes up all the time in discussions about teams that just sort of exist weirdly. I don't if anything were ever to happen with Springfield, it wouldn't be, I don't think, what Henderson did or what the Golden Knights did of we bought this team in Texas and then we disappeared it. Springfield is the headquarters of the AHL, the league itself. So, if anything ever happens to the Springfield AHL team, I don't think that it's going to move from Springfield. That'd be kind of weird. But, I think, again, you'd be looking at that limited number of teams who aren't owned by their NHL team. And then, look at people's attendance numbers. Who has really crappy attendance? Unfortunately, San Antonio, I think they had pretty good attendance. I think that the team itself struggled over their past couple of seasons, and so attendance wasn't as great, and it made it a little bit easier for Henderson to swoop in and for Vegas to swoop in and just eat them. But I'd kind of look at what teams look like they might be struggling. If you're watching a game, who has no one in the stands? And then is it not the Barracuda, who are owned by the Sharks? Who is that team? Is there a possibility there that maybe the owners want to get out? But I think we are moving towards a world where that is the norm. If it isn't already, of the NHL team just owns their AHL team. Because then you have the certainty. You don't end up in the situation that Carolina is in right now of, where do we put our guys? We just got boned by this other team. What do we do? So, I think it is a possibility that in, the not near future, but middle distance future, that's something that they could look into of who owns a team, who doesn't want to own a team anymore. Can we buy it? And then done.
Yeah. I definitely see that being a real possibility of just the NHL's owning their own AHL teams. I know baseball, that's, normal there. It's practically normal here with the NHL now. So I definitely see that being, the norm. I think the Hurricanes will eventually end up buying an AHL team and just have that us. And because it's just such a headache with this. It's very, like you said, do you have to send this guy here, this guy there, this guy there? You got all these guys over in Europe.
Yeah.
It's going to be very confusing. I definitely see them just wanting to nix that all together again. As far as who they get, no telling. It'd be fantastic if they would buy the Charlotte Checkers and just have that back, because that was near perfect. They're both right there.
Yeah. No, that whole breakup was still very weird and surprising. Like, there was no reason for that, especially knowing that 3 years down the road, they're right back in the same spot that they were in before, just because, no one wants to play nice.
And I remember too when they entered the affiliation with Greenville as well. Like, it was all the Carolinas, Greenville being in South Carolina. Everyone thought that was so cool. I remember, I think someone made T-shirts for it of kind of like having the outline of both the states and then all the logos, where everyone's at. That was so cool. And then it's gone. But this is something that we just got to let it play out. Let them send their emails, make their phone calls, send their faxes, and all that stuff, and just let it play out. Again, I think split affiliation will probably be the most likely. Does it happen before the season starts? Who knows? This is something that probably could be changing in an email thread right now as we talk. We just don't know. So we'll obviously continue to talk about this as time goes on, as more information comes out. But this is where we stand right now. It's going to be a very interesting summer and potential season for both the Hurricanes and all of their AHL guys as well. So make sure you're following along at LO_Hurricanes on Twitter. Myself on Twitter at Jared Ellis _96. And this is new for Sarah. She has her Twitter handle. I just remembered it's two different cameras and I can't point down at it, but you saw her. She pointed at it. You can follow her on Twitter at Right Said Sarah. And before I just, go off the rails, here with this episode, I'm already trying to point on a camera I'm not even in front of. We will get out of your hair, guys. And as always, folks, let's go Canes.